Welcome back to my worm bin. Today we are checking in on this one after we found it to be heavily have a little bit too much moisture in it when we last checked on it 2 weeks ago. Normally I leave a blanket on top that sort of locks in some of the moisture, but this time I left it off completely to see how it would do. Seeing still a lot of castings on here, and it seems quite moist. The entire wall of the bin is sort of covered in evidence that worms were climbing up and down it. So I might go ahead and just add a bunch more cardboard to soak up some of the moisture and put the blanket back on, because it looks like just leaving the blanket off did not work. It is very moist throughout this entire bin. So because of that, there's still like a lot of worms over here on the right side. Because I always feed on this side and I always harvest on this side, the idea is to make it easier to harvest finished worm castings without completely depopulating my worm bin from different worms. But as you can see in the finished castings here, there's still quite a few worms, just because even though there's not a lot of food over here, so there's not as many worms, it's still nice, and it's just very moist, and they'll come and hang out because they like it moist. So I need to dry. I need to get some of the extra moisture out of this worm bin just in general, so that this side over here can dry out, because it is just way too wet and sticky right now. And because it's so wet, the worms like it over here, which kind of defeats the purpose of harvesting, or of always feeding on one side and harvesting on the other side, because there'll be a bunch of worms hanging out in the wet finished worm castings, and it'll be difficult to harvest over there. So the whole point is to make it easy to harvest, and because it's too wet, it's not easy to harvest. So I have a lot of wet food to feed to them today. The bin is already super wet, so I'm going to be adding boatloads and boatloads of cardboard today to try to do everything I can to dry out this bin. Which also means, unfortunately, I can't harvest anything without taking out more worms than I'd really want to take out of the bin. I'm still just going to come in and crumble it up a little bit, aerate out here, make sure I'm not getting any of that anaerobic nasty bacteria growing in here. One of the problems with too much water is that it makes it harder for the air to get down in here. So this is more important. Doing this now that it's overly wet, is more important than it normally is. Just because it will, the good bacteria that breathe oxygen will use up all the oxygen, and nothing else can grow otherwise. That's where you get if you get a stinky sewer smelling bin, it's probably because there's not enough oxygen in your bin. Okay, so these finished castings look great. I would love to harvest them and use them in my garden. I just don't want to harvest my worms. I want the worms to stay in here. And you can see just how many of them there are just in these finished castings. The finished castings, they're sticking together so good, like clay almost. I really want them to be a little bit more crumbly. So I'm going to continue just excavating, pulling them out. Yeah, you can see how many worms there are in these near finished stuff. Yeah, I'm seeing very little food in here. There's part of an avocado skin. No avocado left in there. I would say this is even more wet than last time I left it, because I did feed them pretty wet stuff, even though it was already wet last time I checked on it. So it's time to try to fix that. This is an overly wet bin, so we gotta do something about that. Whoa, look at that. The worms do like it though. They it's not crazy wet. It's not like dripping wet. It's moist enough that they're having a good old ball. They're having a good time. But we just don't want to stray too far into the overly wet territory, because that could be a bunch of issues. Yeah. This bin used to not have as many worms as the other one, but somehow I feel like it has more now. So they just reproduced way faster. Not sure what. Oh, look at that. They were like hanging out in this tomato. It's just a mass of worms. I think there's just not that much food in here, so they're just going crazy for whatever food they can find. Every single chunk I pull up is like as much worms as anything else. Got it decently fluffed up. Let's start adding in cardboard. We're adding a lot of cardboard today. We also have to add a lot of food because I saw almost no food in here. So let's start with our cardboard. That's a good amount. I'm going to go ahead and mix it in with some of the castings just to start drying it out as soon as I can. Eggshells. Once again, this helps them grind up their food. We'll mix that in. So worms don't have teeth. They do have gizzards like birds, so they need some kind of aggregate to go in it. So the eggshells is good for the eggshells, good calcium for the for nutrition for the eventual worm castings when I go into the garden, but it's also very good. It's also very good for the worms to keep them healthy and help them get through their food. So it's got like two purposes. So, and then you also saw I added in my coffee grounds. That's like a good level of base nutrition for them. I'm gonna mix that in. Add some more cardboard, just because it's so wet in here. And then I'm gonna add in the kitchen scraps from the week. We had a good amount this week. The strawberry patch is popping off, so you see a lot of strawberry caps. Just banana peels, various food from throughout the week. We'll get this incorporated into the mass as well. I think I harvested some carrots out of the garden, so you can see the carrot peels. Made some coleslaw, so there's some of the cabbage leaves that we didn't use for that. Let's get that all nice mixed in and incorporated. So now we have, this is like a good, like if you were to start a new worm bin, it would look a lot like what we have right here. You might not have the bits of like existing castings I also added to this, which is nice to have because it like helps it get inoculated with the right bacteria you need to break all this down. So if you do like buy worms and you do have a friend with a worm bin, asking even just for a little bit of the castings can be a great way to help kickstart your worm bin. All right, so that is a lot of cardboard, a lot of new food. I'm gonna try and cover it up as best I can with existing casting. So now I kind of have a little bit of a divide here between the finished stuff and the new stuff. And so that is one of the biggest feedings I've ever done. I did it in a slightly new way, but I had to do something, a little bit more extraordinary to try to get all of the moisture out of here. So we will check in on this in another 2 weeks and see how the moisture is doing then. My experiment of leaving this off last time, I don't think worked all that well. I don't like seeing them crawl up along the walls, so I'm gonna keep doing what I've been doing and put this just to keep the moisture locked in on the side that I'm feeding. Because I'm hopefully all the moisture will get absorbed by that new shredded cardboard I added, and it wasn't really getting out of the bin otherwise, and I don't want them climbing up all over the walls. I want it staying in the bin, and then I also want this side to dry out more. So hopefully that will accomplish that. All right, see you soon.